Okay. So again, good morning, Dr. Recinos. So excited to have you and to share space with you and learn more about your journey through facing youth homelessness. My name is Ara Grimaldo. I'm the executive of After Eat to Educate here in Dallas, and we serve homeless youth 14 to 21. We have a drop-in center and also a shelter side where youth can spend the night. And so I first became familiar with your book about 2 months ago when I received it was from Twitter. There was a message about, you're just being a doctor and being in the emergency room and then, asking them a question and then, then coming back and you share that you actually face homelessness. So I thought that was critical. A lot of the youth that we see sometimes lose hope. And so I think your book really provides another light to it and say that, it can get better. So thank you again for being here. As some of you know, for our viewers, that as many as 2.5 million youth per year experience homelessness. So all month we've been trying to bring awareness to the issue. So Dr. Recinos, if you could just start off with just telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey and facing homelessness as a youth.
Of course. So I'm Cheryl Recinos. I grew up in the East Coast and I'm the youngest of a family of 5. In my family, it was incredibly dysfunctional. And so I didn't feel safe at home due to a variety of reasons. But the first big issue was when one of my brothers was sent to foster care when he was 13. But that was just one of the brothers. And so the rest of us were still home, and it was kind of an odd environment to grow up in this home where one kid got sent away. I was 5 when he left, and that was the first time I tried to run away. I didn't feel like I was going to be kept there. I felt like my family would eventually push me out too. And that started to happen when I was 11. My dad had remarried, and his wife and him, they really didn't like me being there and being, somewhat of a volatile young kid. I was experiencing trauma and I didn't have any way to deal with it, and it wasn't recognized. And my dad kind of weaponized like the psychiatric care that was available in the community, and he was familiar with it because his first wife, my mother, and my stepmother were both under the care of a psychiatrist, and my stepmom happened to be in the hospital at that time. And so he had me placed in the hospital as well for 2.5 months. It was completely unnecessary. And looking back as a doctor now, I know that there was absolutely no reason for me to be in that facility. But that escalated into me needing to find a way to leave, because that became his threat. He kept threatening he would send me away again, if not to a hospital, to a group home, to a wilderness camp. And I didn't feel safe. So at 13, I ran away. It wasn't the first time I'd run away, but it was the first time I went far. I stole money from him to buy a bus ticket, and I went from North Carolina all the way to Los Angeles. That was kind of dumb and very dangerous, but it's what I did because it was where my mind was at the time. I was just trying to get as far away as possible because I wanted to feel safe. It wasn't safe. Being on the streets as a 13-year-old was incredibly dangerous. And eventually, one of the programs decided to call the police and have me arrested for being a runaway because I refused shelter. I have mixed feelings on that. Like, yes, it was probably necessary because I was 13, and what does a 13-year-old do on the streets? But also that entered me into the juvenile justice system. I went back home, but not really. I was placed in a juvenile detention center, and then I went to trial for being a runaway. And I refused to go back with my dad at that point. And I think that was one of the smartest decisions I made, is I refused to go back, and I was placed in foster care. But once I got placed in foster care, they told me that I couldn't go anywhere with my mom. I couldn't see her. I couldn't call her. And she was my one adult that I felt safe with. She was not a custodial parent, and she, didn't have the ability to take care of me full time, but she was the one adult that I trusted. And so not being allowed to call her, not being allowed to see her, I started leaving again. And I kept running, trying to get back to California, because in my mind, that was the one place where I had felt safe. And I don't even know how to describe what that safety felt like, but I just felt safe, even though I was on the streets. And so I kept running and kept running, and the judges didn't like that. And so eventually they allowed my dad to press charges for the money I had stolen when I ran away from home. And he pressed charges, and I was placed in maximum security juvenile prison for a sentence of up to 2 years for running away from home and stealing $250 from my dad. I served 10 months there. And while I was there, the foster care system dumped me back in my dad's custody with no repair of their relationship, no plan for how that was going to work when I got home, just, overall telling me to do better because in their eyes, I was the problem. That didn't work. I went home and I tried really hard. I didn't do well. I ended up, having a serious suicide attempt, running away again. And eventually, everything kind of stabilized after my first stepmom and my dad divorced. And I was trying really hard to just make it until I was 18 because I knew that wasn't a safe home for me. But by the time I was 16, my dad was in a new relationship and he wanted to get married again. And there came a point when he told me, just don't be here when I come home. And he only had to say it once. One time was all that I needed, and I left. I ended up back in California where I stayed, but I was on the streets. But, honestly, like when I came back to California, I felt like I was home, even though I was homeless. And it was a terrifying time, and a lot of things happened that should have never happened. But it was, where I ended up, and I guess where I needed to be to become who I am today. So that's the short version of my story.
Thank you, Dr. Recinos. And you said, you touch on being a runaway, the one adult, the safety. And I feel that these are messages that a lot of the youth that we see every day also share with you, as far as they want that one person, and when they get that taken away, I mean, it just spirals into something else, or wanting a safe home and just, desiring that and doing what they can to find that. And then, you talked about foster care. A lot of the youth that we see also, leave and they run away from their foster care homes. And so, now you're a doctor and you're a mother. You have, a lot of just different successes, but also challenges. But what has it been since, turning 18? Because I think a lot of times that's such a 17-year-olds we see have, it's such a critical age, 17, 18. And then, technically you're an adult and you're supposed to know how to navigate life. And sometimes you don't. And so what would you, share with these youth, or like how to deal with, there's some words of wisdom of like, what next after that? Because society tells you you're supposed to be ready, but through all of these challenges, I'm sure, there's still so much you need to survive and thrive.
Honestly, none of us are ready at 18. And I say that as a mom of 3 kids that are 18, 21, and 24, and I'm still fully supporting all of my kids. And so when I look back, or when I look at the youth at the program I'm on the board of directors for now in Hollywood, I don't know how we as a society expect them to be fully independent at 18 years old when rent is $2,000 a month and no entry-level job is going to pay that amount of rent. It's remarkable what we go through, and we don't have the resources for it. I'm fortunate to live in a state where kids who age out of foster care at 18 have the option to stay until they're 21. But it's like a all or nothing approach. If they decide to stay, they can stay, but the second they leave, they can't re-enter into the system. And so there need to be permissions for kids to test their wings if it doesn't work out, or at least, a consistent voucher system to offer housing for young people who really need to have that independence after being kept in a system for so many years where they didn't have a lot of options. Because I know for me, I thought that 18 would be a magical number. I thought that was the thing that was holding me back. I'd had a job and I'd tried to rent an apartment, and they said, don't come back until you're 18. And so I turned 18 in a homeless shelter. I refused foster care. After I'd been in foster care at 13 years old, and after they dumped me out of the system when I was in juvenile prison, I didn't trust them again. I felt like if I went back in, somehow that would connect me right back into the prison system. And I was so sure I would end up in a bad placement and run again. But realistically, I needed that kind of care. And I should have been in a foster care system instead of on the streets. But nobody could have convinced me of that because of what had happened to me in the past. But we need a system of care that, allows a certain amount of independence, something that allows young people to grow because we can't, coddle kids until they're 18 and then say, okay, you're an adult, do everything now. And especially that's true with kids in the foster care system or even within the juvenile justice system. We have to be helping young people develop into who they are so that when they are adults, it's not so terrifying and they have the resources that they need and still continue providing resources for them. Because as I said, I'm providing all the resources for my kids. There's no way they could pay their own rent and pay their own bills and go to school.
Thank you, Dr. Recinos. And then kind of pivoting back to your book and just digging deeper with that, I guess, what was your why in writing this book, and what do you hope, youth get from it, and not just youth, but anyone that gets their hand on it. I've started reading it. I'm a book nerd and I love it. I think everyone should read Hindsight and familiarize yourselves with this critical issue. And so kind of, let us know if, just a little bit about, what prompted you to say it's time for me to share this with the world.
There were a few things that happened in my life that made it time for this book to happen. I was a new attending physician, meaning I had finished medical school, finished residency training, and now I was an independent board certified physician. And so I was in a position where I was safe to write the book because, as a medical student or as a resident, like I'm still under someone else's license and I could have gotten in a lot of trouble for expressing myself. And so I had safety. But at the same time, I'd always told myself I would write the book after my mom passed. I didn't want to share this story while she was still here because I felt like it would really hurt her. And she meant well, but she had bipolar disorder and she really struggled for most of her life, especially towards the end. And so I didn't want to share the story while she was here. What I didn't expect to have happen is my oldest brother, David, he was by far my closest relationship in my family. He died by suicide. And when that happened, it showed me that it wasn't just me that was impacted by all of this childhood trauma. Because, with all of the years that I'd been told I was the problem, it was very easy to internalize that and think, I did all these things. I ran away. I was the one that ended up in prison. I was the one that ended up on the streets. And so it was really easy to take everyone else out of it and not lay blame on my parents because they had convinced me that I was the problem. But when I started studying, adverse childhood experiences, childhood trauma, and things like that, I realized, it wasn't just me. All of us had significant trauma and it wasn't addressed. And so here I had my very successful brother who was suddenly gone. And I still had 3 other siblings at that time. One has since passed away as well. And so it's just the 3 of us left now. And we all experienced this horrific trauma to different extents, and it's affected all of our lives. And so I felt like it was time to tell this story because if it could help even one person, it helped me heal tremendously to write it, but if it could help just one person, it was time to tell it. But I also wanted to help heal my family.
Wow, that's really powerful, and I'm sorry about your loss, Dr. Recinos. And unfortunately, a lot of the kids that we serve here to share similar stories as far as the ACEs and just family trauma, and a lot of times you could just see the hope is gone in their eyes. And so I really think that hearing more inspiring messages, or just hearing other people surviving through it and then also healing and how they heal is so important. So what I guess what words of wisdom could you share with them, and for us as community members, and whomever listens to this that may be in policy or can have positions of power that can impact these youth? I mean, how do we help, and how do we help the youth?
And specifically for young people, you have the right to demand that people care about you and help you through this process. You have the right to demand safety, to ask for housing, to ask for resources, and keep asking until you get it, because there's no reason for you to be sleeping outside. The streets are dangerous, especially for any vulnerable group, whether it's young women, LGBTQ, any young individuals from any community of color or any, language diversity. Like, there's so much unsafety on the streets, and you shouldn't be subjected to that because it increases your trauma. But also understand, if any of the youth workers look back at me at 16, 17, 18 years old, they couldn't have projected where I would end up. There was no way to look at me then and say, okay, she's definitely going to make it and have 3 kids, and her kids will definitely be okay. There was no predictor. A lot of the staff who remember me from back then say that I was the kid that didn't care about anything. And I was quick to curse out an adult. I was quick to demand my privacy and my safe space so that people would stay away from me. And I put up that wall around me because I didn't trust anyone, with good reason. It's okay to set your boundaries. But in all of that, I found a few mentors. And that was what did the difference for me, and made all the difference, because I had a case manager that helped me when I ended up getting pregnant. And she helped make sure I knew how to apply for services, knew how to get into a young mother's program, helped me figure out how to get like formula coupons so that I could afford to feed my child. And it was in that beautiful relationship where I started to trust and started to open up. And so, my recommendation isn't go get pregnant. My recommendation is find that adult who's able to connect with you in a way that you feel safe and respected, so that they can help guide you to the next steps. None of us do this alone. You can't get from A to Z alone. You need somebody in your corner. And so you need an adult who cares, and you need that person to walk alongside you. And it's okay to change adults if the one that's working with you doesn't meet your needs anymore. It's okay to have more than one. And I've continued that throughout my life. I've sought out mentors, when I was going through undergrad and, grad school, and then medical school, residency. I found mentors. I didn't wait for them to find me. I learned early on when I was on the streets that the only way I was getting through is if I spoke up. And so I've continued to do that. And that's what we all need to do, is just speak up and demand what we need.
That's amazing, Dr. Recinos, and I agree. We at After Eight Educate, we definitely strive to let them know that this is a safe space for them, regardless of, you mentioned it, race, sexual orientation, just anything. They can come here, and we want to support them and have the adults here to, if that is what they are, that one person that, that supports them. So, as far as, next steps, as, you're involved, and it sounds like you're in the community, you're on boards, you're obviously making an impact with your clients that you see and you serve. What's next, and how do we support you and your endeavors? I just really hope that anyone that watches this buys your book, because it's full of nuggets, full of wisdom, full of knowledge. It's raw. People, again, a lot of times when I have conversations, they don't think youth are homeless, and they are. They're sleeping on the street, just everywhere. And so I really hope that this conversations brings light to critical issue that it's only getting worse through COVID. And I'm sure you can say some words about that as well.
As far as, the whole situation getting worse, our homeless youth counts here in Los Angeles have demonstrated that the death toll has gone up in young people experiencing homelessness. And that's unacceptable. It's gone up in the past few years. And a lot of that is, from COVID, from, suicide, from infection, from violence. There's just so much going on that needs to be addressed. And so, these are kids. Where I want to see this go. I want in my lifetime to end youth homelessness. We should not have kids sleeping on the streets. We should not have kids in unstable places. And unfortunately, a lot of the time when we talk about the crisis of homelessness, we're talking about, older people. And it's very easy to forget about young people when we've got, very visible people, who are having crises on the streets, especially people who, have mental illness, or who are veterans, or who may have drug use, because all the other people experiencing homelessness are somehow tucked away and hidden. It's by design. Young people hide when they're homeless because they're not safe, either because they're minors and they're trying to make sure that, they don't end up in one of the systems of care, or because they're at risk of being trafficked, or for whatever other reason, risk of violence, or just safety. Kids are not visible when they're young and they're on the streets. what we have to do is we have to get them off the streets, get them into housing, get them into, safe programs for, long-term care, long-term, you know, permanent supportive housing. It's what we all talk about. We all talk about getting young people off the streets, but we just keep throwing money at the crisis and not giving housing. And so that's the issue that we need to address, and that's what I want to work on.
Thank you, Dr. Recinos. And you said a powerful statement: kids are not visible. And we actually had a family with youth, and she said that too. She said, I feel like we're just invisible to everyone. And they shouldn't feel that way. We are all humans and we're all visible. And so and as far as any new projects that you may have or anything in the works that we could support you, again, I mean, I just think I'm so fortunate and I'm so grateful and blessed to have this, to share this space with you, and know that, we'll share this with our youth so that they know, like, hey, she's gone through it, because sometimes they don't believe it. And so I think it's that shared lived experience that can empower them to hopefully feel hope again, and that they can make it. So anything that, any new projects, anything like that, we could share with the youth or anyone in our community and support you.
As far as writing projects, I have a young adult series that I'm working on that I haven't really spoken about anywhere, but it's going to be coming out soon. It's books in verse, so like free form poetry about the experience of being either homeless or runaway or crossover youth, meaning from foster care to juvenile justice system, or aging out of the foster care system, because all of those kind of tie in with my story. Even though I didn't age out of the foster care system, I aged out of the shelter system. And so it's a very similar experience, but with even less of, a protective surrounding on that 18th birthday. And so that's something I've been working on because, some of my friends, some of my closest friends and a lot of my colleagues, they have a hard time reading my work because it's too real. And so I'm trying to give them something that isn't necessarily my story so that they can still talk to me. Some of them are afraid to read the book and then talk to me afterwards because, it's very personal. I told some very personal stories because I felt like it was necessary to let people understand why I made the decisions I made, because that's something I didn't find in any of the other memoirs about homelessness when I was writing this.
Right. And I honestly, and I think that was why I've been so captivated. It's just the transparency of you sharing, just very detailed situations and experiences. But I think that makes it more real for anyone that's watching this, that kids are going through this right now at this moment. And the power that that the fact that you were able to share that with the community, I think it will be, it is a game changer, and it's, people haven't really talked about it and vocalized it. And so, and I love now that hearing your new project, that's awesome. Because for some people, if they have their own trauma, it can be a lot. So having that to kind of, be the entryway to knowing more about the issue is huge. And so we'll definitely be supporting that. And the literacy component, I think it's great. So we'll encourage that. Any other words of wisdoms or just any last nuggets you'd like to share that maybe we missed, so that we could share with the community?
Absolutely. One of the most important things I like to highlight, because I know some people who see my story, they look at it and say, okay, so we can take a homeless youth and get them off the streets and then get them into becoming a doctor. That's not how this works. We need young people to have safe, supportive housing, and then they can become whoever they want to or need to become. This isn't about a journey from being on the streets to becoming a physician. It's a journey about, young people getting off the streets and somehow surviving and breaking those generational traumas moving forward. And so it's really important that we don't have the wrong emphasis here. I need to see young people respected and provided for and given safety so that they have the same chances of a good outcome as my own kids have.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Recinos, for sharing and then just, being here. And, we're North Texas, numbers are high as well. And so I hope anyone that's watching this, supports it and knows it. And like you said, provides that supportive housing. Housing is an issue everywhere, unfortunately. And The data obviously shows that numbers are getting worse, and just hearing you say that these young people are dying, I mean, it's unacceptable. And so thank you again for everything, and I look forward to staying in touch. You made my year. I'm geeking out, so thank you so much for everything.
Of course, thank you for having me.